The message arrived at 3 in the morning, station time. Daniel Carter was already awake. At 62 years old, sleep came harder than it used to. He sat in his small quarters aboard Nexus Prime, reading old letters from his daughter back on Earth, when his communication panel lit up with an urgent red glow. He knew what it meant before he read the words. 15 years as humanity's senior ambassador to the Galactic Concord had taught him to recognize the color of crisis. The Dominion had issued an ultimatum. Humanity had 30 standard days to surrender all colonial holdings in the Orion Reach. Failure to comply would result in military action. The message used the old diplomatic term for it, but Daniel knew what it really meant: extermination. He dressed slowly, carefully. His hands were steady. They had been steady when he was 25 years old, fighting in the trenches of the frontier wars. They had been steady when he signed the peace accords that ended those wars. They would be steady now. His aide, Amy Brooks, met him in the corridor outside his quarters. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She had never seen war. Daniel hoped she never would. "Sir, the Concord has called an emergency summit," she said, falling into step beside him. "Every major species will be represented. The High Sovereign himself is coming." "Al," Daniel said quietly, "I've met him twice. He believes humans are beneath his notice." "Most of the do, sir. Their intelligence reports focus on our biology. Short, no natural armor, no claws or venom." Amy paused. "They think we're weak." Daniel said nothing. They walked through the curved corridors of Nexus Prime, past viewing windows that showed the endless dark of space. Stars glittered like cold diamonds. Somewhere out there, human children were sleeping on colony worlds, unaware that an empire had just declared them targets. The station was already buzzing with activity. Alien delegates hurried past, their translators clicking and whirring as they exchanged worried words. Daniel recognized ambassadors from a dozen species. Some nodded to him with respect. Others avoided his gaze. A few watched him with something that might have been curiosity or perhaps pity. The ambassador, a tall being with gray skin and 4 arms, stopped him near the central hub. "Daniel," the ambassador said, using the informal address that marked their long friendship, "my government has authorized me to offer support. We will speak on humanity's behalf at the summit." "Thank you, old friend," Daniel replied, "but I think this is something humanity must handle alone." They studied him for a long moment. They are not to be taken lightly. Their fleet numbers in the thousands. Their soldiers feel no pain and no fear. "I know. Do you have a plan?" Daniel almost smiled. "Almost. I have words. Sometimes words are enough." They did not look convinced, but he stepped aside and let Daniel pass. Amy caught up with him again as they approached the great chamber where the summit would be held. "Sir, I've been reviewing our military readiness. Admiral Costa has the 3rd Fleet on standby. The 5th Fleet can be mobilized within 48 hours. But even with everything we have, we're outnumbered at least 4-1. "Numbers aren't everything," Daniel said. "With respect, sir, they're not nothing either." He stopped walking and turned to face her. She was so young, so full of fire and worry and hope. He remembered being like that once, before the frontier wars had taught him what humans were capable of. "Amy, do you know why I became a diplomat?" She shook her head. "Because I spent 10 years learning how to kill. I was very good at it. So good that when the wars ended I couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of the people I'd destroyed." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I became a diplomat because I believe in peace. I believe that talking is better than fighting, that understanding is better than hatred. But I never forgot what I learned in those trenches. I never forgot what we are." "What are we, sir?" Daniel looked toward the great chamber where the fate of billions would soon be decided. "We are the species that other species underestimate. We are small and soft and short-lived. We feel pain and fear and doubt. But we also feel love, Amy. We love our children and our homes and our future. And when someone threatens those things, we become something else entirely. He started walking again. Amy followed in silence. The great chamber was vast, a dome of crystal and metal that could hold 10,000 beings. Seats rose in curved tiers around a central platform where speakers would address the assembly. Already, hundreds of delegates had taken their places. The air hummed with 1,000 different languages being translated simultaneously. Daniel found the human section and sat down. Amy sat beside him, her tablet ready to record everything. On the far side of the chamber, the delegation entered. They were with hard shells and blade-like limbs. Their compound eyes reflected the chamber lights like shattered mirrors. At their head walked High Sovereign Al, taller than the rest, his carapace decorated with the symbols of conquest. Al looked across the chamber and found Daniel's eyes. The alien's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. He saw a small human in a simple suit, gray-haired and aging. He saw weakness. Daniel looked back with calm, steady eyes. He saw an enemy who had made a terrible mistake. The chamber fell silent as the Concord's presiding official, a Meridian elder whose species had watched empires rise and fall for, called the summit to order. "We are gathered to address the ultimatum issued by the Dominion against the human colonies of the Orion Reach," the elder announced. "High Sovereign Al will speak first." Al rose and moved to the central platform. His movements were sharp and precise, like a blade being drawn. Daniel watched and waited. He thought about his daughter on Earth. He thought about the children sleeping on colony worlds. He thought about the soldiers who would die if this summit failed. And somewhere deep inside him, in the dark place he kept locked away, something old and dangerous began to stir. The storm was gathering, and Daniel Carter stood at its center, a quiet man with quiet words, waiting for the moment when silence would no longer be enough. High Sovereign Al's voice filled the chamber like the sound of grinding stone. His translators converted his clicks and hisses into words that every species could understand, but they could not translate the contempt that dripped from every syllable. "The Dominion has watched humanity spread across the stars like a disease," he began. "You are a young species, weak, fragile. Your bodies break easily. Your lives end in the blink of a cosmic eye. You have no natural weapons, no armor, no venom. Evolution itself has declared you unfit." Daniel sat perfectly still. Around him, other human delegates shifted uncomfortably. Amy's hands were clenched tight around her tablet. "The Orion Reach was empty when we first surveyed it, 3,000 years before your ancestors crawled out of their caves," Al continued. "We marked it for future expansion. We own it by right of discovery. Your colonies there are an insult to the Dominion." He paused, letting his compound eyes sweep across the chamber. Thousands of alien faces watched him, some with fear, some with interest, a few with what might have been anticipation. "We give humanity a choice. Abandon the Orion Reach within 30 standard days and we will allow your species to continue existing. Refuse and we will remove you ourselves. This is not a threat. It is a statement of fact. They have never lost a war. We do not intend to start now." Al returned to his seat. His delegates clicked their mandibles in approval. The chamber buzzed with reaction. Daniel heard fragments of translated conversation around him. Most species seemed to expect humanity to negotiate, to plead, to offer something in exchange for survival. The ambassador was speaking urgently into his communicator. The Meridian observers sat in their ancient silence, watching everything with eyes that had seen civilizations crumble to dust. Amy leaned close to Daniel. "Sir, Ambassador Lisa Grant is transmitting from New Montana. She says the fleet has already begun moving. They're not waiting for our answer." Daniel nodded slowly. He had expected as much. The ultimatum was theater. They had already decided to attack. They were simply going through the motions of diplomacy to satisfy the Concord's rules. "How many ships?" he asked quietly. "Over 8,000 confirmed, more joining every hour. 8,000 warships, each one carrying soldiers who felt no pain, who knew no fear, who had been bred for conquest across 100 generations. Against them, humanity could field perhaps 2,000 vessels, good ships with brave crews but still outnumbered 4-1. The presiding elder called for humanity's response. The chamber fell silent. Daniel did not stand immediately. He thought about his grandfather, a man who had fought in Earth's last great war, back when humans still killed each other over lines drawn on maps. His grandfather had been a quiet man too. He rarely spoke about the war. But once, when Daniel was just a boy, the old man had shared a piece of wisdom that Daniel had never forgotten. "Son," his grandfather had said, "the loudest voice in the room is rarely the strongest. Anyone can shout, anyone can threaten, but when a quiet man finally speaks, wise men listen, because quiet men only speak when they have something worth saying." Daniel rose from his seat. Every eye in the chamber turned to him. He felt the weight of their attention like a physical force. Thousands of beings from hundreds of species, all watching this small, soft, gray-haired human walk slowly toward the central platform. Al watched with what might have been amusement. His mandibles clicked quietly, an expression of dismissal. Daniel reached the platform and stood where the High Sovereign had stood moments before. He looked up at the assembled delegates. He saw fear in some faces, curiosity in others, pity in a few. He did not speak immediately. The silence stretched. Seconds passed, then more seconds. The audience grew restless. Some delegates exchanged confused glances. Was the human ambassador afraid? Had he forgotten his words? Daniel used the silence. He looked at the delegation, studying each face in turn. Then he looked at his allies. Then the Meridians, those ancient observers who had watched the rise and fall of empires older than human civilization. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the children on the colony worlds. He thought about every human being who was counting on him to find the right words. And then he thought about They had been a warrior race, the powerful, numerous, absolutely certain of their superiority. 300 years ago, they had looked at humanity's first interstellar colony and seen easy prey. They had attacked without warning, killing thousands of civilians in the first assault. Daniel's great-great-grandmother had been among the survivors of that attack. She had watched her parents die in the fire that rained down from orbit. She had been 7 years old. The war that followed had lasted 12 years. Humanity had been outnumbered. By every logical measure, they should have lost. They didn't lose. Daniel looked at Al. The High Sovereign stared back with ancient alien eyes. He saw a small human, a fragile human, a human who would surely beg for peace. Daniel opened his mouth and spoke. His voice was calm, measured, almost soft, but it carried across the great chamber with perfect clarity, reaching every ear and every translator. The last species that threatened humanity's children no longer exists. 9 words, that was all. 9 simple words. Daniel turned and walked back to his seat. He sat down. He folded his hands in his lap. The silence that followed was unlike any silence that chamber had ever known. For 3 long heartbeats, nothing moved in the great chamber. Then chaos erupted. The Meridian Senior Observer, a being who had lived for 11,000 years, rose from his seat. In all recorded history, no Meridian had ever shown visible reaction during a conquered summit. They were observers, nothing more. They watched. They recorded. They did not participate. But now the ancient being stood, his crystalline eyes fixed on Daniel Carter, with an expression that younger species could not read. The ambassador was shouting into his communicator, demanding immediate contact with his. Around him, dozens of other delegates did the same. The chamber filled with the sound of 100 languages spoken at once. High Sovereign Al remained seated. His compound eyes flickered rapidly, a sign of confusion among his species. He turned to his advisors, clicking his mandibles in sharp, demanding patterns. "What did the humans say?" he demanded. "My translator must be malfunctioning." "The translation is accurate, High Sovereign," one advisor replied. He said, "The last species that threatened humanity's children no longer exists." "That means nothing. Which species? When? How?" The advisors had no answers. Amy Brooks sat frozen beside Daniel, her tablet forgotten in her lap. She had studied human history. She had read about the wars, the conflicts, the struggles that had shaped her species. But she had never heard Daniel speak this way. She had never seen this look in his eyes. "Sir," she whispered, "what did you mean?" Daniel's gaze remained fixed on some distant point. He said softly, "Ask anyone old enough to remember. Ask the Meridians. Ask any species that was spacefaring 300 years ago." "I've never heard of them." "No, you wouldn't have." Daniel finally looked at her. His eyes were tired, sad, and something else, something that made Amy want to look away. "Nobody talks about the anymore. There's no one left to remember them." Across the chamber, the confusion was spreading. Delegates demanded information from their governments. Historians were consulted. Archives were searched. The name began appearing in translated whispers throughout the assembly. The presiding elder raised a hand for silence. It took several minutes for order to return. "Ambassador Carter," the elder said, his ancient voice carrying clearly through the chamber, "the Conquered requests clarification of your statement." Daniel did not stand. He spoke from his seat, his voice calm and clear. 300 years ago, a species called the attacked humanity's first colony beyond Earth. They killed 12,000 civilians in the first wave. Men, women, children. They did not ask for surrender. They did not offer terms. They simply began killing. The chamber was silent now. Every being listened. "We tried to negotiate. We sent diplomats. They ate them." Daniel paused, letting that sink in. "We tried to retreat. We abandoned 3 colonies to them. They followed us and destroyed 2 more. We tried everything that civilized species are supposed to try." He stood slowly, not moving toward the platform, just standing among his fellow humans. "And then we stopped trying to be civilized." The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. "The war lasted 12 years. When it ended, there were no left, not on their colony worlds, not on their ships, not anywhere." Daniel's voice remained steady, almost gentle. "We did not defeat them. We did not force them to surrender. We ended them completely, permanently, every single one." High Sovereign Al rose from his seat. "You lie. No species can be completely destroyed. Survivors always remain. Hidden populations, scattered refugees." "Search your archives," Daniel replied. "Ask the Meridians. They were watching even then. Ask them what happened to the—" Every eye turned to the Meridian section. The ancient observer who had risen earlier stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was like wind through dead leaves. "The human speaks truth. They were known to us. They were a warrior species of great power and terrible cruelty. They had conquered 63 worlds before they encountered humanity." The Meridian paused. "We have not detected a living in 287 years. There is now an asteroid field. Their colonies are dust. Their species exists only in our records." The chamber erupted again. This time the noise was different. This was not confusion. This was fear. Daniel sat down. Beside him, Amy was pale. "How?" she whispered. "How did we? How could we?" "We didn't want to," Daniel said quietly. "We begged them to stop. We offered them everything we had, peace, trade, territory, anything." His hands, still steady, gripped his knees. "They laughed at us. They said soft species were only good for food, so we showed them what soft species can do when their children are being eaten." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "Humans are not warriors by nature, Amy. We are survivors. We adapt. We endure. We do whatever we must to protect what we love. And when something threatens our children, we become something that makes the monsters of the galaxy look like children themselves. Across the chamber, High Sovereign Al sat very still. His compound eyes had stopped flickering. His mandibles had stopped clicking. For the first time in his long life, he was beginning to understand what he had threatened. The summit was suspended for 3 days. 3 days for the galaxy to absorb what Daniel Carter had revealed. 3 days for governments to search their archives, for historians to dig through ancient records, for military commanders to quietly reconsider their strategies. On a planet of red deserts and towering hive cities, Admiral Al stood before a wall of holographic displays. He was the commander of the fleet that had been sent to crush humanity. 8,000 warships, 2 million soldiers, the largest military force the Dominion had assembled in 500 years. Now he was reading about the records were incomplete. Most species had tried to forget the horrors they had inflicted during their centuries of conquest. But fragments remained. Testimonies from survivors of attacks, reports from observers who had watched the human war unfold. What Admiral Al read made his chitin crawl. They had been larger than humans, stronger, faster, better armed. They had natural weapons that could slice through metal. They had been spacefaring for 3,000 years before humanity discovered fire. And they were gone, completely gone. The humans had not stopped at victory. They had not accepted surrender when they finally offered it. They had continued fighting until there was nothing left to fight. Human generals had ordered attacks on civilian populations. Human scientists had designed weapons specifically to target biology. Human soldiers had walked through the ruins of cities, making sure nothing survived. One record stood out, a transmission from a commander sent in the final days of the war. "They will not stop," the commander had said. "We have offered everything, peace, slaves, tribute, our own lives. They do not want peace. They want us gone, all of us. Every egg, every larva, every memory of our existence. These creatures are not warriors, they are exterminators." Admiral Al closed the display. He stood in silence for a long moment. Then he began composing a message to the High Sovereign. Far across the galaxy, Commander Chris stood on the bridge of the human carrier USS Resolute. The Third Fleet was at full alert, 2,000 ships spread across the border of human space. They were outnumbered 4-1, but they were ready. Chris had served in the military for 25 years. He had a wife back on Earth and 2 daughters who sent him video messages every week. He did not want war. He wanted to go home, to walk on grass and breathe real air and watch his daughters grow up. But if war came, he would fight. Every human in the fleet would fight. They would fight until the threat was ended, no matter what that required. His first officer, a woman named Kate, approached with a tablet. "Sir, intelligence reports suggest the fleet has stopped advancing. They're holding position at the border." "Holding, not retreating." "No, sir, not yet, but they've stopped." Chris nodded slowly. "Ambassador Carter's words are spreading. They are learning about the—" "Will it be enough, sir, to make them back down?" Chris looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 8,000 warships waited. Somewhere out there, millions of lives hung in the balance. "I don't know," he admitted. "I hope so, but hope isn't a strategy. Keep the fleet at full alert." Back on Nexus Prime, Daniel Carter sat in a small, private room with the Meridian Senior Observer. The ancient being had requested this meeting, and Daniel had agreed, though he was exhausted. "You carry a heavy burden, Ambassador Carter," the Meridian said. "The memory of what your species did to the—" Daniel did not deny it. "We are not proud of what we did. Most humans today don't even know the full truth. We teach our children that we won a war. We don't teach them how we won it. Yet you spoke of it openly in the chamber. You reminded the galaxy of humanity's capacity for destruction." "Because I had to. They were going to attack our colonies, millions of people, children. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. I will carry the weight of those memories forever if it means protecting them. The Meridian was silent for a moment. Then he asked the question that had brought him here. Do humans regret what they did to the... Daniel looked up at the ancient being. For a long moment he said nothing. Every day, he finally answered. Every single day. We dream about it. We write songs about the horror of it. We have monuments to remind ourselves of what we are capable of. He paused. But if another species threatened our children the way they did, we would do it again, without hesitation. The Meridian studied him with crystalline eyes that had witnessed the birth and death of empires. That answer, the ancient being said slowly, is why my species has never threatened yours, and why we never will. Daniel nodded. I understand. I wonder if you do. The Meridian rose, his movements slow and deliberate. We have observed 10,000 species across 1,000,000 years. We have seen conquerors and victims, warriors and pacifists, builders and destroyers. But we have never seen anything quite like humanity. What do you see when you look at us? The Meridian paused at the door. We see a species that loves peace but excels at war, a species that creates beautiful art and terrible weapons with equal skill, a species that will sacrifice everything to protect those it loves. He turned back to face Daniel. We see a species that frightens us, Ambassador Carter, and we are very, very old. We are not easily frightened. The door closed behind him, leaving Daniel alone with his thoughts and his memories and the weight of being human. The summit reconvened on the 4th day. The great chamber was more crowded than before. Species that normally ignored conquered meetings had sent observers. News drones from 100 worlds hovered near the ceiling, broadcasting to trillions of beings across the galaxy. Everyone wanted to witness what would happen next. Daniel Carter took his seat among the human delegation. Amy Brooks sat beside him as she had throughout this crisis. She had not slept much in the past 3 days. None of them had. Sir, she whispered, our intelligence indicates that they have been in emergency session since your speech. Admiral Al has reportedly advised the High Sovereign to withdraw. Advised, Daniel noted, not ordered. No, sir, the decision remains with Al. Daniel nodded. He watched the delegation enter the chamber. They moved differently now. Before, they had walked with the confident stride of conquerors. Now their steps were careful, measured. Their compound eyes swept the room constantly, as if searching for threats. High Sovereign Al entered last. He was still tall, still powerful, still decorated with the symbols of conquest. But something had changed in the way he carried himself. The arrogance was gone. The presiding elder called the summit to order. The chamber fell silent. We resume discussion of the ultimatum against humanity, the elder announced. High Sovereign Al has requested to speak. Al rose. He walked to the central platform, but his movements lacked the sharp precision of before. He stood where Daniel had stood 4 days ago and looked out at the assembled delegates. When he spoke, his voice was subdued. The Dominion has spent the past 3 days studying the records of the war. He paused. We have read the testimonies. We have reviewed the evidence. We have consulted with species who observed the conflict directly. The chamber was absolutely silent. We have learned that they were not weak. They were one of the most powerful warrior species the galaxy has ever known. They conquered dozens of worlds. They crushed every enemy they faced. Another pause, until they faced humanity. Al's compound eyes found Daniel in the crowd. Ambassador Carter spoke the truth. They no longer exist. Humanity did not merely defeat them. Humanity erased them completely, thoroughly, permanently. His mandibles clicked softly, the equivalent of a sigh. We have been fools. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Dominion prided itself on understanding our enemies before engaging them. We studied human biology. We counted human ships. We calculated human resources. but we did not study human history. We did not understand what humans do when their families are threatened. He straightened, drawing himself up to his full height. The Dominion withdraws its ultimatum. All military forces will return to Dominion space immediately. We will pursue no claims against human territory. We offer no conditions and ask for no concessions. The words hung in the air, simple, direct, complete surrender without a single shot being fired. This matter is closed, Al concluded. He turned and walked back to his seat. He did not look at Daniel again. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions. News drones swooped lower, trying to capture every reaction. The ambassador was embracing his aides in relief. Throughout the human section, people were crying, laughing, holding each other. Daniel sat quietly through it all. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. Amy noticed. "Sir, we won. Isn't this good news?" "It's the best possible outcome," Daniel agreed. "War has been avoided. No one will die today because of the—" "Then why do you look so sad?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Because I just reminded the galaxy what humanity is capable of. Because I used the memory of a species we destroyed down to the last child, as a weapon. Because I saw the fear in Al's eyes and part of me was glad." He finally looked at her. "We are not monsters, Amy, but we can become monsters when we need to. Today, I showed the galaxy our teeth. I prevented a war by threatening an even worse one. That's victory, yes, but it's a victory that tastes like ashes." Later that evening, Daniel stood alone at a viewing window on Nexus Prime. The stars stretched out before him, cold and beautiful and indifferent. Lisa Grant's voice came through his communicator. She was still on New Montana, waiting to hear if her colony would survive. "Daniel, I just received word. The fleet is withdrawing, all of it. Our colonies are safe." "Good," Daniel said. "That's good. How did you know they would back down?" Daniel was silent for a moment. "I didn't know. I hoped. I gambled everything on the possibility that Al was smart enough to be afraid." "And if he hadn't been, if he'd called your bluff?" "It wasn't a bluff, Lisa. Every word I said was true. They are gone because they threatened our children. If they had attacked, we would have done the same to them. However long it took, however much it cost, we would have ended them." Lisa was quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. "Sometimes I forget what we are. So do I most days. I want to forget, but days like today remind me." Daniel watched a ship drift past the window, its lights blinking against the darkness. "We are human. We create beauty and horror in equal measure. We love deeply and hate fiercely. We will do anything, become anything, sacrifice anything to protect our own." Is that a strength or a weakness? Both. Neither. It's simply what we are. The door behind him opened. Amy entered, hesitant. "Sir, the Concord is requesting your presence at a formal dinner to celebrate the peaceful resolution. All the major ambassadors will be there." Daniel turned from the window. He looked tired, old, but his eyes were steady as they had always been. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." Amy nodded and left. Daniel took one last look at the stars. "War is coming someday," he said quietly to himself. "It always does. Someone will forget the lesson of someone will underestimate humanity again, and when that day comes, we'll do whatever we must." He turned from the window and straightened his jacket. There were diplomats to talk to, alliances to strengthen, futures to build. Behind him, the stars continued their eternal dance. And somewhere in the vast darkness, the scattered dust of the drifted through space, a silent monument to the galaxy's most important lesson. Never threaten humanity's children. The quiet man had spoken, and the galaxy had listened.